no debates this week, no big bumps and changes in the polling, although, Joe Biden had his requisite having to walk back comments. This week, I think it was one where he basically told the Latino community to fall in line, which was weird. He also was, each week it's a different story, right? Maybe like every 3 or 4 days, this guy has some type of gaffe. As you know, it was the end of last week. He said that poor kids can be just as smart as white kids. And now he saved himself there as well. But there's all sorts of these type of problems. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders has been, complaining about the media coverage he's getting. Now, look, not all politicians, many politicians do that. And you do it because you want the best media coverage you can get. But there was multiple Democratic candidates who said at the Democratic debate, you guys are using right-wing frames. Yeah. And that certainly is the case with Sanders when they go after him. And they're even doing it in the context of his story. I mean, he's been on the stump saying Jeff Bezos is, America's richest guy, that, he's getting all these free tax breaks and he's getting all these free services without having to pay his taxes, essentially. And, go figure. The Washington Post doesn't write good stories about me. I wonder why that is. Well, that's not a conspiracy, is it, Farron? It's like the billionaire knows what he's buying when he goes out and he buys a media outlet. And if he thought he was buying, some type of Village Voice or some type of liberal outlet, he probably wouldn't have bought it. He bought the Washington Post because there's a culture there of really sneering, not just at people with Bernie Sanders politics, but people who they perceive as outsiders. And there you have it.
And really, yes, the situation is so much worse today, but that's basically since the beginning of the United States. Rich people would buy the newspapers because they wanted to protect themselves and the businesses they owned and get some good coverage of that. And so, no, Bernie's not off base at all. I mean, earlier this week, what was it? The Washington Post ran 15 negative stories about him in just 16 hours. So averaging one per hour, just cranking these things out, completely clickbaity, dishonest headlines. And so Bernie has a very strong case. People saved the receipts, screenshots of all of those headlines going around anytime somebody said Bernie was assaulting the free press, which is what Meet the Press said in a tweet. They said he's assaulting or attacking the freedom of the press. But that's not what this is. Look, the basis of liberal media in general, and we've talked about this for years, obviously, is because the corporate-owned media does not cover these stories in a meaningful way. And in many of them, they ignore altogether. Corporate media is a thing. Corporations do influence the coverage of the outlets that they cover. And I can give a great example here. A couple years ago, Pap was working on the Yaz case. We had a reporter at the New York Times who had been working with him. He had been doing some investigations, was putting together this phenomenal piece for the New York Times about how Yaz was killing women. Birth control.
Yeah, birth control. Okay, good.
And so then, after about 2 or 3 months, he finishes the article. It was phenomenal. And he says, great, giving it to my editor. We're good to go. A couple days later, we hear back and he says, hey, I was told we can't run this story. It turns out Bayer, the big advertiser in our paper.
Oh, wow.
And they don't want to run this. So that happened. And so when people say, no, these corporate, they don't call the shots at the network. They do. They may not be doing it on a day-to-day basis, but there is now no longer a single media outlet in this company, a corporate media outlet that does not also share a board member with a pharmaceutical company. They all have at least one from Big Pharma in there, and that's just one of the ways. I know that's not what Bernie was necessarily talking about, but it is part of his broader point. Corporations call the shot with the corporate media.
Right, and let's be clear. I mean, even if there was never a moment where stories were killed, and we know that this happens. Vice Media, remember, they wouldn't attack the NFL because they had some type of deal with them or something like that. But look, even if it's not that, which I know for a fact that like back in the early, the mid 2000s at Air America, at MSNBC, that Robert Wright, and presumably on in response to the people who owned his company at GE, had a lot of problem with people getting too actively anti-war on air. Yeah. But for the most part, they don't have to police these people because they are hired in the first place because they know they're simpatico. Mm-hmm. Like I say, Jeff Bezos is not going out to buy the Village Voice. He's going out to buy an institution where he knows the people share, to a large extent, his fundamental values and truths. And, there's nobody has to go and tell you on Ring of Fire, don't do this, this is too sensitive. You got hired because people know what you're going to do anyways. And all Bernie is arguing is that when you have a billionaire, and if you believe, like I think Bernie might, and I certainly do, that billionaires are a policy failure, you have a billionaire, they're not going to buy a property that is in the business of explaining things to the American people without having that property fundamentally align with the values he had that helped him earn supposedly $1 billion. That's just the reality of it. Look, Farron, we've got to take a break. Let's talk more in the next hour. Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back.